Yo, what's happening, guys? It's GM Cody back with another weekly video like I usually do at the beginning of the week. And this week we are going to look at something a little bit different. We usually look at a game. I usually do game overviews. That's what I've been doing a lot of lately. We're actually looking at a game supplement. And not just any game supplement, but a really old game supplement. I figure we haven't done something properly old school in a while, and I thought I would pull something off the shelves, dust something off, if you will, and really go back in time and look at something really old school. And so tonight, we're going to be looking at the first fantasy campaign by Dave Arneson. Of course, this supplement written by Dave Arneson shortly after he left TSR. And basically, what it is kind of like a campaign setting for Blackmoor, you know, the original fantasy campaign. So that's why it's called the first fantasy campaign. And we're definitely going to dive into that. Of course, a little bit of a preamble. I always do a preamble before I start talking about whatever we're going to be talking about. First off, I want to say we just reached 350 subscribers, and I'm blown away by that. That's awesome, guys. It's really cool to see all the new people hanging around the channel, commenting, and just saying all the really nice things you guys have said, and I really appreciate it. It's really cool, and it keeps me motivated and keeps me going, and it's the whole reason I do this is to share my passion and love with you guys, and I'm glad you guys are enjoying it. Somebody did recommend to me, and I've already been thinking about it, about doing more topical discussions on the channel, because I don't do a lot of, or really none of that, and I'm definitely going to start doing that. Start doing more topical discussions and stuff just besides game reviews and that kind of thing. I kind of shy away from that kind of thing for a few reasons. One, I think other people, there's tons of advice and people talking about their opinions about the way, different aspects of role playing and whatnot, and I just never felt very qualified to give my opinions on that, really, because everybody seems to have an opinion on it, and but some people have expressed interest in hearing my opinions on this sort of thing, so I probably will give some more topical videos in the future. Actually, starting next week, I'm going to do some kind of topical video. But I will continue doing what I usually been doing too. But I'd like to spice it up a bit, do something different. But anyways, yeah. Regardless, I want to thank all you guys that have just recently subscribed and everybody that's been subscribed and watches the videos and whatnot. I know the other thing is I do long form videos, and that's not for everybody. Now I do kind of want to address this because I had a few comments on it recently. I like long form videos, so I do what I like. I do what I would want to watch, right? And this is the kind of video I'd want to watch. And I like long form stuff, whether it's books, movies, comic, whatever kind of medium. I like long form media. So and YouTube's no different, really. I like long form videos and podcasts and stuff. So I'm going to keep it that way. That's not going to change. But I definitely will do some short videos too for those of you that I realize not everybody has time to watch like an hour long video. So I'm going to start doing some short videos as well. Maybe not shorts because I kind of despise shorts. That's just me. I do like watching you guys, other people do shorts and stuff, but just not for me. But I will be doing some more shorter form videos for sure. Yeah, and that's pretty much all the only like preamble really I had. I do want to thank everybody that came out last night for the OSE game. I think that was the most people we had viewing at one time, watching, in one of my live plays, and that's really cool that everybody came out to watch us play. And that OSE game's been really fun so far. We've only had 2 sessions, but it's been really good. The Prowlers and Paragons game should be continuing, though I am thinking about putting that game on pause for a while, just so I don't get overwhelmed. And and we are starting up Doom game after Thanksgiving, the day after Thanksgiving. I probably won't be streaming that game, but I plan on doing recaps for you guys. So there's that. But yeah, we're going to look at the first fantasy campaign by Dave Arneson, published by Judges Guild. Now, the first fantasy campaign, again, like I was telling you guys, was based off of Dave Arneson's original fantasy role-playing campaign, which is Blackmoor. And those that, I think everybody's familiar with what Blackmoor is, or at least vaguely familiar with it, but I'll give a short summary for those that aren't. Essentially, Blackmoor was the proto Dungeons and Dragons. Before there was Dungeons and Dragons, there was Blackmoor. It's, a known fact that, Dave Arneson really created this concept in his home games and started it with Blackmoor. And that's the games. Out of Dave Arneson's table, he brought that to Gary Gygax and his crew over Lake Geneva. And, both of them, Gary Gygax was like, hey, this is a really cool game. We should publish it. And so they did. And it was a collaboration between Dave Arneson and Gary Gygax, though Gary Gygax did most of the actual legwork for writing the rules, because Dave Arneson was notorious for not really writing rules. He was a pretty disorganized guy, but he had a lot of great ideas. And Gary Gygax could, take those ideas and put it into words. So both of them deserve credit, of course, equal credit. And Gary Gygax deserves all the credit he deserves. But Dave Arneson really came up with the concept of the modern role-playing game, I would say. That's just my opinion, but that's kind of how I see it. Even though I do think, and I've stated this before, that idea had been floating in the ether in the soup of the wargaming communities of the 70s for quite some time. Even before the 70s, in the 60s and 50s, these guys were playing wargame campaigns that had a lot of role-playing elements, and I think that was just a natural development. At some time or another, that would have, role-playing games would have happened with or without Dave Arneson and Gary Gygax. They just happened to be the ones that published it first, I think. That's just, again, my opinion. But from my research and from me talking to some of these people, that's kind of what I've come to the conclusion of. But that's neither here or there. So the quick publication history about this thing. So I think this came out in 1977 originally, even though it says 1980 in here. But mine's my copy here is a later printing. So, but I thought this came out in 77. I could be wrong. I think maybe it came out in 79, and I think this is like a second or third printing. So, 1980 on the publication date on that. That might be right. I don't know, but I thought it came out the tail end of the 70s. Of course, Dave Arneson originally, did work for TSR, and the only two things he published for TSR were, of course, the original Dungeons and Dragons. He had a co-author credit on that, and then of course Blackmoor, which I do have on the shelf over there, which was the second supplement for the original Dungeons and Dragons. So that was the only things that Dave Arneson, actually contributed to Dungeons and Dragons. And then he got fired and left the company, essentially. And, I'm not going to go to the details of that. You can look it up, or there's videos here on YouTube. People explain it really well about the drama between Gygax and Arneson. But essentially, Dave Arneson parted ways with TSR and Gary Gygax. And he somehow stumbled across, Judges Guild, which was producing third-party supplements for Dungeons and Dragons. Now, I don't know, and, I would like somebody to tell me this, if Judges Guild actually had like an official license to produce stuff for Dungeons and Dragons. I know on some of their books it says, for use with Dungeons and Dragons and such, but I don't know if they actually did have a license at the time or not. I'm assuming they did. But in this book, it mentions Dungeons and Dragons nowhere in here. And it's a quite interesting little book. For one, again, it doesn't mention Dungeons and Dragons, and it does mention a lot of things about Dave Arneson's Blackmoor rules, right? Like the kind of rules he was using at his table. It kind of hints at those ideas. It doesn't give you the rules. It just hints at them. And this book is really interesting because it really is just like Dave Arneson's like notes. It's like looking at Dave Arneson's notebook almost. So it's not very cohesive, you know. It's a little confusing and a little all over the place. But that's kind of how I feel Dave Arneson was, right? He was kind of almost a mad genius, right? And you know, this is like the kind of book I would probably produce, right? Just like my videos. So, anyways, it's kind of all over the place. But it's definitely interesting to look at. It's an interesting perspective into the history of the hobby, and it's an interesting supplement. And I think Blackmoor is actually like an interesting place. It's pretty cool. So we're gonna take a look at it and discuss it. Now, I will say that it's probably not going to be too enjoyable for you guys to look at the text of this book because it is an old book from the late 70s. It's, you know, very plain typeset. There is art in here, and the art is cool, but it's not, you know, it's not the art's not too flowery, and there's not a lot of it, so it's going to be a little bit boring to look at, but hopefully I can, my narration will make up for the lack of presentation of this book. And also, the scan I have here is not the greatest, but it is what it is. Hopefully you guys can read it okay. I really hope you guys can, but if you can't, of course, you know, you can follow along with my narration as I'm looking through it. And, yeah, so should be cool. So let's take a look at the first fantasy campaign. All right, here we are. First fantasy campaign by Judges Guild. Oh, I do want to show you guys one other thing, because I do have the original copy of the first fantasy campaign. It also came, like all the Judges Guild campaign settings did, it came with a really cool hex map. And the Judges Guild maps are very cool. Now, I'm going to be very careful with this because it does have some value to it. So I try to keep this thing in nice condition as I can. And there it is, the map that comes with the first fantasy campaign. And mine's in pretty good shape, actually. And really cool map of Blackmoor, for sure. So let's carefully fold this up. And there we go. Okay. I just wanted to show you guys the map because it is pretty cool. All right, first fantasy campaign. So like I said, this book is kind of all over the place. It's not quite a campaign setting. It's not quite a guide to play in Blackmoor. It's a little bit of everything. It's a little bit of Dave Arneson explaining his original Blackmoor campaign. It's a little bit about... It is a little bit of a campaign setting. It's a little bit of a source book. And it's a little bit of just ideas. But there is some cool stuff in here. So introduction, you know, Dave is going on here and talking about Blackmoor and the original campaign and whatnot. And the Blackmoor campaign, this is basically like the wargaming elements of Blackmoor. Now, I've never really heard how extensive the wargaming elements were in the, you know, the actual Blackmoor campaign that they were playing back then in the 70s. But those guys were wargamers, so I imagine that they got into that quite a bit. And this looks very similar to what their other wargame campaigns looked like at the time. So, you know, they have the different factions of Blackmoor and the amount of income they have, and you know, how big their armies are and how many heroes and stuff they have. Now, the other interesting thing about this book is it has statistics and things in it, and abbreviations, and they don't explain them. You know, you kind of have to figure it out. So I don't know what all this means, but you can kind of extrapolate when you look at it what it kind of means, right? So like I said, it's kind of all over the place. So here, they're talking about like the armies and how much income and how strong all the different factions are around Blackmoor. This is the prices to hire different units around, levying an army basically around the different areas of Blackmoor. How much it costs to equip them and buy them and transport them, build constructions like siege towers and castle walls. Here's different personnel you can hire, engineers and assassins and all that good stuff. And of course, this carried on into Dungeons and Dragons, right? These wargaming elements where but it was a different kind of wargaming campaign. And that's why I should have brought over the white box. But, on the front of the white box, it says fantastic wargaming rules or something to that effect. It doesn't say role-playing. They didn't really know what to call it at the time. But, these guys still had a lot of holdovers from their wargaming days. And that held over all the way until, AD&D 2nd edition, where, you hit level 9, you become a lord, you can build a keep or whatever and hire, attract followers and hire guards and, basically become, you become a lord, and then it becomes a whole, it goes into domain play. It becomes a whole different type of play. And this all comes from wargaming. And so it's not surprising that it wouldn't surprise me at all if, especially the Blackmoor group, if they were playing their games this way, where they started off as lowly adventurers going into the dungeons underneath Castle Blackmoor, and then, once they amassed enough wealth and were known, that they became, lords and kings unto themselves, which we'll see later. They do mention a lot of the famous characters from the Blackmoor campaign, and they did end up becoming like lords and great wizards and stuff. So anyways, it's still going on about the prices of hiring an army and all that stuff in the different duchies. Prices to make roads and bridges and canals and all kinds of stuff, which all this stuff is actually kind of interesting. And if you were to run this kind of campaign, I mean, this is just another source of information to do that. I mean, there's probably better sources for it nowadays, but still it's kind of cool to look at. Campaign notes, which is the map we were just looking at, and here they're telling you what each of these hexes, the different hexes represent. Blackmoor's more infamous characters. So here we go into the more famous characters of now these are the infamous characters of Blackmoor. The Egg of Coot, which is one of the most famous entities in Blackmoor. It's this mysterious giant egg-shaped thing that feeds off people's energy and egos, essentially. And it goes through the Egg of Coot here. It's a very mysterious thing, but it has, it raises armies and controls people and stuff. So nobody really knows what it is, though. It's just a huge, massive jelly that's kind of shaped like an egg. And here he's talking about the Egg of Coot and the different little facts about the Egg of Coot. Like one is enjoys little jokes like scrawling obscene words and phrases on the walls of latrines and garbage cans to show its power. Skywriting, pulling the wings off flies, etc. General level of jokes indicates a level 2 intelligence with a mature age of 3 to 6, never having been denied anything. So yeah. Has a huge laboratory that turns out spells for selling, which are, of course, perfection in itself. 30% chance of failure per level spell. Historical interest is when the Ron of Ah Fu served in the factory of a spellmaker, but was kicked out when he surpassed the X standard of excellence. Which, since the perfect standard is impossible to surpass, meant he, the Ron, had committed the ultimate wrong and was forced to flee rather than become the newest victim to be experimented on. So all this humor and stuff is something you'll see a lot in these older publications, especially, and it's a very common theme around this time. Not just in the old role-playing stuff, but in the old wargaming stuff too. At the time, these guys didn't take. I mean, they played serious games and they were playing a real game, but at the same time, they had a lot of humor to them as well. And I kind of like. I mean, like I think it's funny. I like this kind of stuff. You know, this lighthearted stuff. Probably not as prevalent in my games as blatant. You know, but at the same time, I think I do like this kind of like level of humor, and it's quite interesting to see because it's a common theme amongst all these, you know, role playing and wargaming products of the 70s and early 80s. And you know, I've mentioned this before. I think it's something that's missing in role playing today. Something I would like to see, not in every role playing game, obviously. Like I think, you know, there's definitely a place for very, very serious, straight-faced games, but at the same time, I don't see enough of this kind of like tongue-in-cheek kind of humor and stuff. And a lot of games back then did this kind of thing, and I thought it was great. You know, like it didn't. You know, Warhammer 40,000 or Warhammer Fantasy 2 is a very good example of this. It was very tongue-in-cheek when it first started, and now it's like super serious and kind of killed itself, right? But anyways, it's something I would like to see more of, like some games with some more tongue-in-cheek humor. Not every game has to be super serious. And these guys definitely set the example for that, I think. Anyways, back to the Egg of Coot. All close servants of the Egg undergo rigorous mental conditioning that is aimed at crushing all their mental initiative. This is then replaced by the overwhelming desire to serve the Egg and do exactly as it wished. Part of the standard conditioning has them believing that all the Egg does and communicates is good and right, with all unbelievers, being those jealous of the Egg's perfection, should be treated accordingly. All right. Number 4, the Egg is known to hold an unshakable grudge against anything that has ever any way caused a difficulty that is not immediately overcome. It will direct its efforts exclusively towards the demise of this force, even to the extent of ignoring past offenders in order to go after the newest threat. This is the result of the Egg's tremendous self-esteem and admits no failing. So the Egg is just a psychopath, right? A megalomaniac psychopath, but a very intelligent one, and just insane. The best insight into the Egg's ambitions are in its creed, which is daily intoned by hundreds of conditioned followers around its capital city. Might is right. Might is right. Don't give a sucker an even break. Winning is everything. Get what you want by hook or by crook, but get it. The ends always justify the means used to achieve it. The meek may inherit the earth, but that means the strongest will rule everything. I fear the rest of the creed is a bit too strong for our Gentile readers and deal with certain breeding privileges and customs. Awesome. Let it suffice that when an area is captured by the Egg, it shortly undergoes a dramatic population decline and acquires a new and very unhuman population composition. Awesome. I'm not going to go into each of these characters as much detail, but the Egg of Coot is probably like the most famous, infamous character of Blackmoor. So, and I think the most entertaining one. So I thought it was worth reading in detail the Egg of Coot. And the rest of them I'll just kind of briefly summarize. The Ron of Ah Fu, which we saw mentioned here under the Egg of Coot. He used to work in the spell-making factory of the Egg of Coot, and he surpassed the spell-making abilities of the Egg of Coot and went off and did his own thing. But he's just as self-centered and egotistical as the Egg of Coot. He's 7'3", and he's perfectly logical. He's also a warrior of 10th level, and his magic he dispenses is also of the 10th level. though he will never use less than level 3 spell types, as level 1 and level 2 spells are beneath him. I like that. He's like an arrogant spellcaster and won't cast like petty spells. He will ignore the advice of those around him. He also breeds dragons. This is probably the most interesting part. The Ron is also in the process of turning out an android zombie army that will shortly be turning out robots by the cartload. Completion has only been delayed by various border troubles, including Egg of Coot raids that have called the Ron away. So all the other 9 Dukes of the Duchy owe allegiance to the Ron, and one of them has become his assistant. So yeah. So the Ron of Vafu is, probably the second. The Egg of Coot and the Ron of Vafu are like these big, pretty evil, crazy forces that are, constantly controlling the duchy. And one thing about Blackmoor too is, this was the beginning of like Gonzo. Like the Blackmoor is a little Gonzo. You know what I mean? But in a fun way, in a good way. Like if you wanted to do Gonzo, I think Blackmoor's worth looking into. Simply because I think it sets a perfect example how to do Gonzo right in a lot of ways if you want to go that direction. Because it does keep things. Elfbait was discussing this on his stream Sunday because he was talking about Gonzo games. That the best Gonzo is when everything else is normal, and then you have crazy things pop up every once in a while. And Blackmoor does a pretty decent job of that, because these things aren't rampant through the world. These things are not the norm. You know what I mean. But when you encounter them, it makes it interesting, and it's just little things sprinkled in here and there. But I think Blackmoor does the Gonzo really well. With the Egg of Coot, obviously, and the robots, like this rogue wizard making a robot zombie army. The Jinn of Selleck is a great wizard, basically, and he is a womanizer. He woos women and flies around on a magic carpet, teleporting around the world, and pissing all the men off, essentially. But he's also like a really powerful wizard, so if he doesn't get the women he admires or wants, he could potentially, he will just like swat the whole towns and areas. Marfelt the Barbarian. Yeah, he's a barbarian, I guess. I'm not going to go through his whole spill, but he's a barbarian that was granted a whole area of land by one of the dukes. Dukes of the Peaks. This was originally the mortal duke that sided with the Ron Fu, but has since spent his time changing sides in the wars between the Duchy of Tin and the Egg of Coot. And they're like the wealthiest duchy in Blackmoor. And everybody just kind of like, people do invade them and stuff, but they just give them like slave girls and money and such to leave them alone. And they're just wealthy and decadent. The Blue Rider is this famous mystical warrior that saved a wizard from a monster, and this wizard gave him a set of magical armor, blue armor, and a magic sword that always thirsts for combat, like always wants the next challenge of combat. And so this mystical warrior was this common warrior that saved this wizard and became the Blue Rider. Mello and the Hobbits. Mello was the companion of the Blue Rider, and they would regularly go around in Blackmoor guarding against thieves and bandits. Kind of like Fafard in the Green Mouser or something. The Great Svinny was a paladin. I think he might have been the first paladin in role-playing games. And was, I think, most of I'm pretty sure, don't know about Marfelt the Barbarian, but pretty sure the Blue Rider, Mello, and the Great Svinny, these guys were actually real player characters, that became larger than life, characters that became, immortalized in Blackmoor. But at one time they were played by people that were playing in Dave's Blackmoor campaign. I think the bishop is the same way. Of course, the bishop's the head of the church. Um, and then we get into Blackmoor itself and kind of like some facts about the no lands, the duchies of Blackmoor. What's interesting is the population is pretty sparse in Blackmoor. Approximately 1,000 peasants, 100 soldiers and nobles, uh, 4 wizards or sorcerers, 1 dragon, several trolls, about 100 elves, plus a sorted number of ints, orcs, dwarves, werewolves, etc. So that's interesting. It's just giving you some information about all the areas around Blackmoor, Blackmoor Castle, the pits, the ruins, Wolf's Head Pass, the Comeback Inn, which is really famous. Inn in Blackmoor. The town of Blackmoor, giving you information about it. And here's a map of the town of Blackmoor and the surrounding area, which is really cool, actually. And not a big place, obviously, so I see why it can only hold 1,000 people. The history of Castle Blackmoor, which we're not going to get into particularly. And here's Castle Blackmoor, a map of that, which is really cool. And this goes into the great outdoors. Dave is talking about here how he used the Outdoor Survival Board, which was a game produced by Avalon Hill, and Gary Gygax mentions it in his in the original Dungeons and Dragons. To one of the required utensils to play the game was the outdoor survival game, which you actually didn't need, but they did use this briefly in Blackmoor, and I think in Gary's early campaigns as an outdoor travel map instead of using the actual map here. And I think they quickly moved out of it. He's talking also that they didn't actually travel out into the broader world until the 3rd year of the campaign, which is really interesting. So I guess they were just diving into the dungeons of Blackmoor for 3 years until they actually went out into the wilderness. And here's the random encounter table for the regions around Blackmoor. Movement rates, which is interesting, I suppose. It is interesting that it repeats a lot of information that you would find in Dungeons and Dragons. Now, of course, the encounter matrix I could see because that would be specific to the region of Blackmoor. But like the movement rates, you could just find that in Dungeons and Dragons. It's interesting that this is printed again here. Again, though, this isn't specifically designed for Dungeons and Dragons per se. So maybe Dave is telling you, and I haven't compared the movement rates here, of course, to what is in Dungeons and Dragons, but maybe they're different interpretation than Dungeons and Dragons. Here's some prices for different things in Blackmoor. I don't really know what it's saying here. I think it's okay. These are things you would buy and have delivered or something. I'm not quite certain what it's telling you here, but you kind of have to interpret whatever it would be. It does have prices for room and board and such. The outdoors of Blackmoor. Drawing your own map. So this is some good advice here, telling you how to draw your own map. He's kind of going through the process of basically randomly rolling up a world map, which is interesting. Human habitation. This is actually pretty useful stuff right here. How to mark out like a hex, for your divide up a hex for your hex crawl, I guess. Which Judges Guild really is responsible for the first hex crawl supplements. And maybe sometime we'll look at those, like the Wilderlands supplements, which I think are actually my favorite thing from Judge's Guild. Blackmoor dungeons. So here's the first dungeon. You know, that's, supposedly these are the original maps that Dave Arneson used. Now, I've seen different variations on these maps, and Dave does mention here that he changed and altered this map through different years of gaming and going to conventions and stuff. So I'm not sure if this is the original map he originally used. It's probably not, but it's probably pretty close to what he used. And he gives some little notes here before you get into the dungeons. Sir Fang, originally a 9th level fighter, and it tells you who played it, Dave Fant, that fell prey to a vampire and didn't get away. So was a fighter, a 9th level fighter that got turned into a vampire, and he roams around inside dungeons of Blackmoor. The elves, after the second destruction of Blackmoor Castle, the elves were made responsible for the care and protection of the area and its defense. Our elf player took a number of steps to do this. 1. They have set up a barricade at the foot of the hill leading to the castle that forces each entrant to pass a test of purity. Generally anti-vampire, including a drink of holy water for each, provided at bargain rates by the Church of Facts of Life, run by Bishop Carr, who's Mike Carr, which was I think Mike Carr, of course, wrote a couple games for TSR, and he was definitely part of that group, and I think he was part of the Lake Geneva group, actually. Making it through that would be adventurers enter the castle, where the elves have set up a great fair that fills the courtyard. There are hundreds of fabulous deals, some worth what you pay for, and some shady types, cut purses and the likes. This lets the judge will and deal with the players to empty the purses and make them wonder what is going on. And then number 3, there are now turnstiles leading to the dungeon. 1 gold piece for admission, as well as taking an elven tour, since canceled when 2 of the elves when 2 dwarves let Fang out of his box. See attached short tour sample. You can also sign the Adventurers book, which gets you a genuine I visited Blackmoor dungeon button when you come out of the main entrance. No winners yet. Each of the regular exit entrances from the dungeon are heavily guarded by elves armed with holy water hoses and other anti-evil charms, plus an elven prince and 2 elven lords. So if you can reach a door and are still good, the pursuit will break off and the elves will let you in. Here's some art, which I haven't talked about any of the art. I don't think we've ran into too many. I'm sorry. Choking a little bit. But here's some art in one of the doors of the dungeon. This is actually pretty cool, actually. Magic protection points. Having gone over all my records, the surest indications that the point values given in the first edition chainmail formed the basis for my system. Exceptions occurred were due to the addition of new creatures beyond those given in chainmail, and thus necessitating changes. Here's what I came up with. Okay, so he's kind of, again, it's just kind of like some of his notes about his original game and how he was using chainmail as the basis of his original rules. The dungeon levels, the new convention set. So this is probably what he was using at the time. Again, this is probably a revised listing of the dungeon levels. But basically it goes room to room and gives very short descriptions of what's in that room, how many monsters, what their armor class is, and their HTK, assuming, is their like attack level, which I would interpret that as pretty much what their THACO is. But that probably meant something else in the Blackmoor campaign. I'm just not quite sure what that means. Maybe he gives an explanation of it somewhere at the beginning of the book, but I don't remember ever seeing it. As you can see, the descriptions are very short and brief. The other interesting thing to note here is there's a shitload of monsters in these rooms, which is not very uncommon for these really early dungeons, because, again, a lot of people were playing at once. These guys had big groups, and so they, packed their areas accordingly, I suppose. But, they're in like one area here, there's 40 goblins. So, of course, if you were to run this today, you would have to use your best judgment and cut it down. Even though if I ran, the dungeons of Blackmoor, I'd probably come up with my own keys and stuff, but I probably would use the maps. I think the maps would be useful. Yeah, so this is just all the keys and what's down here. I'm seeing if there's anything particular interest on the lower levels. Yeah, there's some nasty things down here. 13 giant weasels, 1 mummy, 20 gargoyles. Wow. 10 heroes. So yeah, typical old school dungeon. It's just kind of wild and crazy and wacky. There's a Balrog down on the 9th level, which I think this Balrog was a common theme in the original Blackmoor games. There's another Balrog on the 10th level. There's a dragon egg on one of these here. Interesting. So here's the dungeon levels. Let's see if we can flip this around. Whoops. How do I do this? I forget. I'm not familiar with all the new stuff. You can't rotate the page anymore? That's a bunch of malarkey. That's finished. I'll figure that out later, but here's the dungeon levels. And the dungeons are pretty interesting overall because it's kind of it's a lot more, it's a lot different than what you would see like in modern dungeon design. Like everything's like running at angles, which is really interesting to look at nowadays because you're used to seeing dungeons and they're usually kind of square looking, and this dungeon is very like sprawled out and like it very at 45-degree angles, which is interesting. And the dungeon maps are kind of hard to read, but they're legible. You could definitely use them. I think I've used these before. Here's like all the different connecting levels or something. This is of the dungeons. I do like these little like watermarks with the creatures on them on the dungeons, and I do like the what do you call it? Like the art of the dungeons. Like they're pretty cool looking. The dungeon maps. Wow. This is level 10, obviously the biggest level. And the craziest. Jesus Christ, look at this thing. And little sub-dungeon. And that's it for the dungeon section. And here you get into magic swords. But he also goes into detail talking about... or maybe not yet. He's not talking about that yet. He's just talking about different magical swords here. And kind of talking about the rules and stuff with these different swords. Yeah, I'm not sure what he's talking about here. A little confusing. Gypsy sayings and chance cards. I think we passed it up somewhere, but he does go into explanation a little bit of summary about the magic system they were using in Blackmoor. So they were not using the magic system you see in Dungeons and Dragons. The magic system in Blackmoor, and I'm sure a lot of you guys know this, they used it was a consumable magic system. So you would have to make consumables, and it would be potions and scrolls, and it was that kind of thing. And then you would use those up to use cast magic. Now Dave was infamous for changing the rules all the time, and I don't think the rules were ever really written down, which is a shame because I've always really wanted to look at I mean we would all like to see what that game looked like at that time, We do have we do have a lot of clues though through other players' notes, and of course this document gives us a lot of clues into the secrets of Blackmoor, if you will. But I still would have liked to seen a really cohesive document written up by Dave about what the original Blackmoor rules look like. Now, Dave Arneson did go on to make at least one role playing game that I know of, and I've never looked at that. It might be worth looking at some point. And he also, oh yeah. So he wasn't responsible for it, but there was a fan-made kind of OSR rule set, which I do have, called Dragons at Dawn, which was basically kind of gathered together all the clues they could about what the original Blackmoor game system would be, and tried to make a coherent game system out of it. And that might be worth looking at some point too. I do have a PDF of it. I don't have I think I used to have a physical copy of it, but it's disappeared somewhere. Here's about like the gypsies and sayings they would have, and legends, and of course the gypsy like tarot card kind of thing. Here it is right here, the original Blackmoor magic system, and he talks about kind of what their magic system worked like, but it's just this couple of paragraphs here. Description of magic items, couple magic items, special interests, how to become a bad guy. Svinson's Freehold, the paladin, the great Svinny. This is his freehold that he built, and I think this was one of the original characters in Blackmoor that became a paladin, of course. And we talked a little bit about him earlier, and this is the map of his freehold, which is kind of cool and pretty neat. Like, this would give you an idea as a player if you wanted to play this kind of like domain level play. Just give you an idea of something you could design for your keep or whatever. Different types of dragons, which is, of course, that probably went ported straight over to D&D. Wizardry apprenticeship, how to become a wizard. Different languages. Vampires. Creature psychology. It talks a little bit here about Loch Lomond, which is another area that the players in Blackmoor were exiled out of Blackmoor and went to another area. And it briefly talks about Lake Gloomy, Loch Lomond. This is really cool here. I'm not really sure what is showing here. Approach the city of Father Dragon, showing his size. The adventurers teleported themselves in the main throne room before the outside defending Balrogs could attack them. Were able to destroy the evil device. So it has nothing to do with this, but I think this is supposed to be the Egg of Coot here, this thing. I'm not really sure though, but it's very cool looking. Very provocative. I like this. This is pretty cool. This one's cool too. And that's basically it for the first fantasy campaign. How long are we going here? About 48 minutes, so that's pretty good. Hope you guys have enjoyed this look at the first fantasy campaign. Of course, I didn't go into super duper detail about it, but I thought I'd just give you guys a quick overview and scan of it for those of you that have never seen it before. I thought it was worth taking a peek at and looking at tonight, especially because I really had no idea what I was going to look at tonight. So I just saw that on the shelf. I thought it'd be cool to look at. I do think Blackmoor is pretty cool, and I know there's been a couple other iterations of it. I particularly like the original iteration of Blackmoor. I think it's a lot more interesting than what it was turned into under. They made some supplements for Beckme for Blackmoor and such, and then it was incorporated into Mystara at one point, and it was incorporated into Greyhawk at one point. So but I liked it better when it was its own place. It had its own thing. and they changed some things when it, dipped back and forth. Now, Dave Arneson later on, before he died, he did make his own campaign setting that was compatible with 4th edition Dungeons and Dragons. I'm not sure if he made a version that was just system agnostic. I have never looked at that. I would like to take a peek at that and see what it looks like. I think it would be really interesting. But I hope you guys have enjoyed this overview. Things coming up this week. Sorry, I've been coughing a lot. We have tomorrow I'll be playing in Bear's Star Trek Sojourner game, and we'll be revising our, retaking on everybody's famous doctor, or everybody's favorite doctor, Dr. Jeb Taylor. So stay tuned for that. That should be fun. Wednesday night is the Four Color Cafe, and I will not be on the Four Color Cafe this week. I probably will be doing a live stream with Andy and Vince talking about Lord of the Rings Wednesday, because we couldn't do it last week because Vince had to work. And I think we plan on doing that Wednesday this week. Let's see, what else? Saturday, I'm going to be doing a special live stream and having a very special guest. My older cousin's going to come on. Tommy's going to come on and talk to us. He's got a topic he wants to talk about. We're going to kind of be talking about the progression of role-playing games, and probably talking about, a little bit about him as well. And I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit, and just generally just hanging out and shooting the shit. Saturday evening should be around, same time I do everything, like around 7 o'clock. So come check that out. That should be cool. And yeah, should be cool. So hope you guys have enjoyed this video. I'll catch you guys next time. Y'all take care.